Hello, and thank you for volunteering to be a part of Hope Haven. My name is Jen Javis. I'm the Executive Director at United Way of Douglas and Polk Counties.
Hi, welcome. My name is Heather Molesworth. I am the Director of Family and Community Services and Operations for West Central Minnesota Community Action.
United Way provides community coordination for Hope Haven. At each host site, there will be a church point of contact, and that person will be your point of contact for all things related to Hope Haven with regard to when you're scheduled to volunteer, whether or not you're bringing a meal, and where to bring those items to. We will also have a community coordinator that will be present and on site each night when our volunteers arrive. Her name is Ashley, and you can see her pictured here in this slide. When you arrive to volunteer for an overnight shift, Ashley will be there to provide evening volunteer orientation. So after you watch this video today, if there are things that you have questions about, there will always be someone on site to provide you with those answers. In her absence, I will be there to provide you with that same information. We can give you resources in our community. We can share with you about the way that the program works and other ways that you might get involved in the program. If there are other things that you'd like to do, or if you have questions about how things work, we will absolutely be there to answer those questions for you. We'll also be providing program support to you. So when you're there and wondering about something, or if there's a question that you had that you didn't feel was answered as part of our training today, we're going to walk through that with you one-on-one and specific to the evening that you are serving and volunteering your time. So don't worry about things that you're unsure about or that you can't memorize or remember from today's training. Just know that either myself or Ashley will be there to walk you through that, and we won't leave until you feel confident with that information.
West Central Minnesota Community Action will be providing the case management. We will be doing the guest intake and check-in processes, as everyone who presents homeless in our community is to come to our office at 1910 Aga Drive, Suite 206 in Alexandria. At that time, we will go through our intake process and ensure that Hope Haven is the right fit for our guests. Upon arrival at the church, Allie, who is also pictured on this slide, will be the case manager. And if in Allie's absence will be primarily myself and or other case managers, but we will be sure that you have, between the community coordinator and the case manager, you will be notified if there's a change. We will go through the guest and volunteering screening processes. There is a short one-page application that as a volunteer needs to be completed, along with a confidentiality agreement. West Central Minnesota Community Action staff will work with the guests during the day to provide other resources that they may need throughout this process. As a reminder, for the process, if an individual presents as homeless, please send them to West Central Minnesota Community Action. Again, that is at 1910 Aga Drive, Suite 206 in Alexandria, and our phone number is 320-304-3458. Once they come into our doors, we will conduct an intake and go through our intake paperwork and ensure that Hope Haven is the correct fit for the guests. As part of the church check-in, guests will go directly to West Central Minnesota Community Action each day at 4:30 p.m. They will do a check-in with the case manager, and at 5 o'clock, they will go with the case manager over to the host location. If they have a vehicle, they will follow the case manager, and if they do not have a vehicle, the case manager will transport them to the location. I do want to remind there are times where guests may have a job. If we know that they have a job and maybe work till 10 o'clock or midnight sometimes, depending on their work schedule, we will be sure to inform. There will be communication between the church coordinator, the community coordinator, as well as the case manager. The case manager will be in contact with the United Way's community coordinator to let her know that we have a guest that works until 6 o'clock and will not be coming until approximately 6:15. So when she is there, they can let all the volunteers for the evening know. We will also be sure at that time if there's any food allergies or anything that the volunteers for that night need to be aware of, that will be communicated at that time. At the checkout time, checkout at each host location may vary just slightly depending on if there's a preschool or not. However, checkout in the morning will be the volunteer's responsibility to ensure that the guests leave the property. If there's somebody who presents as homeless after hours, we ask that you please call 911. The police department is aware of where each host location is located. And if they receive a phone call, they will be sure to put the guests up in a hotel for the evening. And then they will work with West Central Minnesota Community Action the next morning to go through the intake and screening process. Some of the responsibilities between United Way of Douglas and Polk counties and West Central Minnesota Community Action are to screen and provide free training to all volunteers. We will also be sure to screen the families in accordance with its guidelines. Only guests deemed appropriate for services will be allowed as part of the Hope Haven program. We will be delivering host site beds, pillows, and blankets as needed for the families. To offer case management provided by West Central Minnesota Community Action to help them obtain permanent housing and other services with a goal of self-sufficiency, and to have trained staff and volunteers available during registration and by cell phone to handle emergency situations.
Host responsibilities for Hope Haven include providing overnight accommodations for individuals in their facility for approximately 2 to 3 weeks. Each host will have outlined the dates that they will be serving as a host for Hope Haven. The goal will be to provide a safe place for all of our guests to sleep. In addition to that, hosts will provide the individuals and guests that are staying with us with evening meals as well as breakfast or morning meal and items for a sack lunch. Our hope is to provide a sufficient number of volunteers who will have completed this training and be available from 6:30 in the evening until approximately 7:30 in the morning, Monday through Sunday. It is 7 days a week. We start our host locations on a Monday and then wrap up on a Sunday before we move to a new location. Volunteers may need to be occasionally available for other things throughout the week, but that will be determined as we go. So here's a glimpse of what that overnight schedule looks like. At 4:30, the community coordinator and the church volunteer will arrive at church. If you have volunteered to drop off a meal, this is the time that you should drop that meal off. It's really important that we have that drop off time at the same time that the church volunteer as well as the community coordinator are available. In each host facility, there may be other programming going on and an inability to store food until the arrival of those two individuals. So again, if you are serving a meal or dropping off a meal, please do that at 4:30, and you can leave that for the church coordinator as well as the community coordinator and case manager to serve when our guests arrive. Guest arrival is at 5 o'clock. This gives time for the community coordinator and the church coordinator to lay out all of the materials needed for the program, to prepare the rooms for overnight stay, as well as the supplies that are needed for that evening. When the case manager arrives with our guest, they will get settled in their rooms that they've been assigned to, rooms that were made available. Dinner will be ready at 5:30. And at that time, we're asking that it's just the guests as well as the case manager, the community coordinator, and the church coordinator that are dining together. There's limited space at some of our host locations, and this also reduces the number of meals that need to be served for everyone in the program. By 6:30, our overnight volunteers will arrive. At this time, the overnight volunteer should check in with the community coordinator and get the information that they need for their overnight stay at the host location. From 6:30 to 7, they'll be provided with a training on all of the contents that are arriving in our toolbox, which we'll talk about in just a moment, as well as any information that they need to know about the guest, their stay that evening, and any arrangements that they need for checkout in the morning. At 7 o'clock, when that training is complete, all staff will leave. By staff, I am the case manager as well as the community coordinator and the church volunteer, and the doors will lock. At that time, then, our overnight guests will be able to participate in conversation with our guests, but more likely our guests will be tired and want to go directly to bed. Then our volunteers are there to ensure that there is safety for our guests as well as our volunteers, and that the facility remains locked until morning. At 6:30 in the morning, we ask that our volunteers would wake up our guests and help provide instruction as to how they should pack up and where items should be stored. This will vary according to each church location, dependent upon their day schedule in the next morning. So again, this will be covered with you by the community coordinator when you arrive. We'd like breakfast to be ready at 7 o'clock. This should have also been dropped off the day prior at 4:30. Breakfast may be simple items that are set out, such as bagels or muffins or cereal and milk. They may also be other items that can be heated up in a microwave, but we do ask that all meals are ready and able to be prepared real simply by setting them out or by heating them up in a microwave. By 7:30, we ask that all of our guests will depart so that the host location is prepared to open their doors for business the next day, or in some cases, as we mentioned earlier, school. The items that you'll receive as far as the program supplies are concerned is a really large toolbox. The toolbox travels with Hope Haven from one church host location to the next. And in that box are all of the supplies that you will need for the evening as you're volunteering with our guests. There will be a binder that contains several forms that we'll talk through briefly. There will also be a track phone in there. That track phone has a specific number for the Hope Haven program. This gives you a resource so that if someone needs to reach you, let's say another volunteer needs to get in touch with someone who's staying there, or maybe it's a case manager or community coordinator that needs to share some information with you for the morning. That phone needs to be plugged in and charged at all times. You may also use this phone to make outgoing calls that are program related if necessary, but do feel free to use your own phone if you need to do that. This track phone also is shared with the local law enforcement so that if they need to reach you for any reason, or if someone presents as homeless outside of the church facility, the law enforcement professional can reach out to you directly and ask you what the situation is so that they can respond appropriately. We do also have a thermometer in the toolbox that is available if anyone is concerned about how they're feeling. You do have the ability for them to take their temperature. We will provide you with personal bags. Guests will be given those bags in advance, so likely you won't have to do much with that, but if there are any personal items that they need, those will be made available, such as personal hygiene items or shower passes that would go with them in the morning. There's a locking cabinet as well that's contained in that toolbox. So if there are any items that we're storing for the guests, that they can be locked and stored safely, as well as providing cots, blankets, sheets, and pillows for each of our guests. Finally, this is a quick overview of the program documents that are contained in the toolbox. There is a host site agreement that we have with each church host location outlining the things that we just covered, as well as a church shelter contract that gives you an idea of what's necessary for this program. Churches are able to serve as temporary housing, and there are guidelines around what that looks like for each church host location you can reference, as well as orientation policies and confidentiality agreements to be filled out by volunteers. We have intake forms available for both volunteers and guests, as well as daily check-in forms and guest log information that you can share, information that you have from your time as a volunteer for the case manager and community coordinator to read the next day. We do have the ability to monitor medication. I think it's really important at this time that we note that you cannot provide any guest or administer their medication. However, you can give them their medication to administer themselves if needed. All of this information will also be covered in the training on your arrival. And then there are many miscellaneous forms available for you to use that we'll walk through. Item inventory will give you information on smoke breaks and how to handle those throughout the evening, as well as signs that you'll hang up on the doors of the host location so that if anyone presents as homeless, they know that the program is closed for the evening, and they're also given a phone number to call so that they can secure a place to stay until morning when they check in with West Central Minnesota Community Action.
As a volunteer, it is important to know your role and responsibilities. We at West Central Minnesota Community Action do conduct a Minnesota Public Records check on all our volunteers as well as our guests. It is also important to maintain confidentiality, and as part of Hope Haven, we have a confidentiality policy that we expect all of our volunteers to abide by. Confidentiality is essential if we expect to maintain safety for the guests as part of Hope Haven program. The following are guidelines that must be adhered by of all the volunteers and staff. The names of the individuals we have contact with must be kept strictly confidential. Guest identification cannot be shared without an authorization for release of information form signed and on file, which specifically designates whom this information can be shared with. All conversations, written correspondence, or other information regarding guests of Hope Haven is not to be discussed or relayed to any other party without the authorization for release of information. Volunteers shall not discuss or acknowledge guests in public places so as to avoid public recognition of a guest's identity and to avoid inadvertently placing a guest in danger or embarrassed. Remember that many guests may be ashamed that they must use this service and that they need to know you will not discuss their situation with anyone without their permission. Volunteers shall respect the privacy and confidentiality of the guests by not initiating contact with the guests when or if they are meeting in a public setting. Under no circumstances should the guests, name of the guests, or any details regarding their situation be given to the police or any other agency or person without the guest's express consent. The circumstances of the family should not be discussed with anyone outside staff and volunteers and for the purpose of case consultation only. These discussions should never take place at a public setting where conversations may be overheard. Audiences at various speaking engagements frequently ask questions about local events. Discourage this by explaining that for reasons for confidentiality, we do not discuss anything that happens locally, whether or not our services were involved with the case. Some exemptions of the rules. By law, staff and volunteers are considered mandated reporters. Accordingly, disclosed cases of child and/or vulnerable adult, physical or sexual abuse, or cases of neglect must be reported to the appropriate agency, such as law enforcement, Douglas County Child Protection, or Pope County Child Protection, and/or Adult Protection. Staff members and volunteers may disclose confidential information when there is a clean and intimate life-threatening danger to an individual. Law enforcement, child protection, and/or adult protection should be notified if someone is threatening to harm or kill another person and has the capacity to do so. An example, a 3-year-old stating that he or she wants to kill his or her mother would not apply, as he or she does not have a physical ability to carry out this threat. Law enforcement and/or emergency medical services must be notified if the guests are threatening to commit suicide. Staff and volunteers should always feel free to call West Central Minnesota Community Action Director of Family and Community Services and Operations at any time to discuss situations or problems. Sharing your own feelings and thoughts are important and a necessary way of taking care of yourself. I'm always available for a phone call if you need to. And it's important that you read and understand the confidentiality of policy and agree to comply with these policies and understand that a violation of confidentiality will be a result in being dismissed from the program. It is important that we remember that caring for our community and providing a safe place to sleep is our goal at Hope Haven.
So we want to say thank you for giving of your time and your abilities to be able to serve in this program and to volunteer with us and your host location for Hope Haven. If there are questions that you have that are specific to either things that we mentioned or things that we did not mention, we'd encourage you to reach out to your church point of contact first. They may have those answers. They will be the point of contact that will be able to assist you with any instructions that you have for dropping off food if you're preparing a meal, or arrival time and procedures that you might have questions about in order to make your decision. Upon arrival, on the night that you arrive for your overnight volunteer role, we will provide you with the answers to any additional questions that you have. So be assured that if you're not completely clear about what's expected of you, that we will have that information ready for you and will not leave until you feel completely comfortable. So once again, thank you for volunteering with United Way and West Central Minnesota Community Action, along with our partner host locations, to provide safe shelter for those who do not have that shelter during these cold winter months. We'll see you soon.